My name is Morgan Young. I am interviewing Larry Campbell for the Oregon State Capitol Foundation Oral History Project. It's April 24th, 2024, and we are in Larry's home in Eugene, Oregon. Thanks for being with us this afternoon.
It's a pleasure having you. What kind of questions have you got, Morgan?
I want to start a little bit before we talk about your life as a state representative. Set the scene for me a little bit. How you first got involved in the Young Republicans in college, a little bit of your life before the State House.
Well, I'd start my life back quite a bit earlier than that. My folks had a difficult time during the Depression, and the first home that I had an opportunity to live in, I was 14 years old. And my dad bought 6 acres on top of Mount Scott in Portland and decided to build a home. And we lived in a stable for a year while he was building that home, and it turned out to be a wonderful place to be. It also introduced me to one of my favorite activities in life, and that's we got a 6-month-old Arabian stud, and he lived with our family for the 37 years that he was alive, and that's most unusual for a horse. But as you'll see, I'm sure as we go through this discussion, horses are very important to me. Then I went to high school at that point in time and had to make a decision about going to college. And my folks were not able to help me. I wanted to go to the University of Michigan and eventually go to the University of Michigan Law School. And Dad said, he said, if you'll stay local, Mom and I'll try and help. So when you get ready to go to law school, we'll be able to assist you. Well, I knew that wasn't the case, but it was unrequited love from him. And so I picked Lewis and Clark College. And that was an important selection because 2 of the people that had a major background support for me turned out to be professors. One was Dr. Eugene Dubach, who was the former Dean of Men at Oregon State University. And he came to Lewis and Clark as the head of the political science department. The other was Neil Sabin, and Neil was the debate coach. And speaking as you look and refer to legislative activity as a major advantage. And Dr. Dubach really was a very, very conservative individual. And I got good grades from him because I could repeat back everything he said to me. The important thing, though, was he convinced me that I should get involved politically. And that's when I joined the Young Republicans. And by the time I was a junior, I was the college president of the Young Republicans. At that time, we had 5 colleges involved in Republican activity in the state of Oregon. I then basically got deeply involved with Mark Hatfield, and Mark was running for Secretary of State. He then, of course, ran for governor and ended up being a United States Senator. And I was on all those campaigns, and we became very close friends. In fact, so close that when it came time for Carlin and I to get married, Mark claimed he was the best man. And he did that job very well.
So you had early experience in the leadership role with the Young Republicans, which then we'll see play out later in your elected office.
I had more leadership role with the college. I was picked to head up one of the major fundraising campaigns. We were successful. I was added to the college board of trustees. I was selected as the president of the Alumni Association, and my greatest thrill with the college is when they picked me as an outstanding alum. So I got a lot of involvement from a college standpoint. Then, of course, I went into the telephone company as my means of making a living. Although I did do some night law school work, it didn't work out well for me. And then I was very active in the Portland Rose Festival. And it was interesting because it was late in my Rose Festival activity that I needed a date for a Rose Festival dance. And I hadn't been dating much because I'd been trying to raise in the telephone industry. I was now a district manager. I was trying to do impossible things with the Rose Festival and my college and so forth. And one of my fellow employees at the telephone company says, you need a date. I said, yeah, I do. I need a date for this special event. Got just the person that you ought to contact. Well, little did I know that this person that I was going to contact was Miss Oregon 1959. And when I basically I called her for a coffee date, we then went to Stan Kenton. We were doing all kinds of things before we got to that Rose Festival dinner dance. And I had determined that she was going to be my wife. The interesting thing is that I was 10 years older than she was. At the time that we were going together, she was 19 and 20, and I was 29 and 30. And people said it wouldn't work. Well, you had an opportunity to meet her earlier today. We've been together now for 62 years.
With how many kids?
We have 4 sons, and we're very proud of those 4 sons. They've been very involved. And the sons are one of the reasons why I felt good about doing what I did politically. But I felt even better when it came time to leave politics and open our own business. I'll tell you a quick story on this one. We had our Thanksgiving dinner. Everybody arrives on Thanksgiving. Grandma dictates. And basically, as we sat around the table, I said to the boys and Carlin and the girls, I said, what would you think? I'm going to leave the legislature. And what would you think if we started a family business? Well, immediately there was question in the minds because Dad had always been talking about buying a service station, and everybody would have a white jacket and a bow tie and a little vacuum cleaner that they would go around. Well, Dad surprised him and said, no, what I'm thinking of is starting a lobbying firm. And in essence, to make a short story longer, Kevin was with Dr. Dobson's Focus on the Family. You ever heard of that organization? In California. Just got married. Says, Dad, count us in. Craig had been with Kulingoski in the Attorney General's office. He said, Dad, I'm with you. Darren wasn't really up to that kind of thing, but he came in as a partner. And of course, Mark, being a doctor, wasn't interested in politics. So that's the way the Victory Group started.
So it was working for the telephone company that brought you to where you are now in Eugene, correct?
Correct. I was transferred to, right after the Rose Festival. I was president of the Rose Festival, and they transferred me immediately after that to Eugene, where I became a district manager. And that was in 1976. And in 1977, Ted Kulingoski was a representative in District 43, and he took a job that Betty Brown, the senator, opened up when she went into the judgeship. And Ted had held that seat. It was a very, very strong Democratic registration. And in fact, I talked to him before I decided to run, and he wished me good luck. It worked out very well for us because a group of timber people came to me and said, would you be willing to run for the House of Representatives? I hadn't been giving it any thought. Mark Hatfield had never encouraged me politically other than to continue to help him get elected. But in the back of my mind, I had the idea that that might be something I'd be interested in doing. And so Carlin and I, as we do on all major decisions, sat down and talked our way through it and decided that I should give it a go. And I went to the telephone company vice president. I said, these folks want me to run for the legislature. Would you okay it so that I could do it? Because I'm certainly going to take on something like that as a district manager and without the company's approval. Interestingly enough, Gary Wilhelm, who was the minority leader my first session of the legislature, was the telephone company manager in Klamath Falls. In the legislature, he was my boss. Outside the legislature, I was his boss. As it turned out, even though we had a number of discussions, the telephone company finally approved my running for the legislature. And I basically took a look at the district that I was going to run in, and it was strongly registered Democrats. In fact, I just wrote down some that I thought you might be interested in. The first election that I had was 1978, and the seat had opened up in 77, so I started campaigning in 77. My campaign was made up of visiting homes, over 6,800 personal visits in the district, and I don't remember now how many. We kept track of the volunteer contacts, but I looked through my material and I can't find it. But I made contact with so many different people in the district with that door-to-door. I sent notes out. My schedule put me out of bed at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I hand wrote notes and thank you notes and so forth. And we had door hangers, and basically I personally signed every door hanger, said, just drop by for your vote. And it was interesting the kind of responses that I got. I attempted to emulate the job that Kulingoski did. In other words, I was already a constituent legislator, and every week in our local newspapers, I had ads, if you've got a problem, give me a call. This was during the first election. Well, the Democrats in that first election had a total of 15,000 registered voters, and the Republicans had 8,300. And we won the race with 9188 to 6750. Now, from then on, I dropped my door-to-door, of course, down to 1,000 a race. And the second race, they had 14,900 Democrats to our 10,000 Republicans, and I won that race 14,620 to 7,247. Now, I could go through the rest of these, but they're almost all exactly the same. We doubled the number of votes that our opponents got. And it was always because we had a campaign that was vibrant. We had a candidate that was willing to do anything to make contact with the people in the field. And that's something that I had an opportunity to bring to the legislature, because we were losing races because candidates weren't doing a good job. And they would claim it, or they would blame it, I should say, on the fact that, well, we have more registered Democrats than we have Republicans. Well, what I could show them is, if you have more Democrats than Republicans, you need to make sure that the Democrats recognize who you are and that you're positive and you're going to do a good job for them. And look at what happens. My race was an example.
Morgan, really quick, would you mind scooting this way just a little bit? Like in your
Towards
chair?
you?
Yeah, towards me.
Do we have to start over?
No.
No.
Did you cut us off?
No, we're still good.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's
Okay.
great. Thank you.
So, talk to me a little bit about. It seems like your winning in '78 was a surprise. Was it a surprise to people that all of a sudden this person's coming in what had been a heavily Democratic district?
People who were
I think people in Salem. I would
people
say.
in Salem did not expect me to win, because the registration was so wide. But they also didn't expect someone to run a campaign like I did. I got a call from a fellow, I still remember his name, Ringsdorf, and he was a grass seed grower. This is very early in the campaign. He said, "Larry, I understand you're going to run for representative in my district." He said, "Would you be willing to come out and meet with a couple of us farmers?" And I said, "Sure, absolutely." And I remember a day, it was a Thursday night, and I got there, and he had a large equipment yard, and there were pickup trucks everywhere. And when I went in, the place was full of people. I mean, full of people. There must have been 80 some people there. And, come and see a couple of us. And the first question they asked me was, "What do you know about agriculture?" And my answer, unfortunately, I don't know anything, but I'm willing to learn. I've ridden every piece of equipment that they've got. I've been to every activity that they have. I had teams from that agriculture group put up my big signs, teams of 4, using post hole diggers and 4x4s and big signs. I had them set up a Campbell fair, chicken fair. 250 people showed up in a legislative district. And Senator Johnson from Roseburg bailed out of an airplane at the event. It was catching. People all over said, we haven't had anybody drop by like you do. We set up teams because a lot of it was rural. We set up teams 4 to a van, and we drive down the road and drop people off at the entrance to a farm area. They would walk into the place and meet with the voter, and the van would drop everybody off and then come back and pick them all up and take them to the next group. And we ran 4 vans at a time in the rural area. And people would say, who is Larry Campbell? Well, I don't know, but he was in our area. And the word spread. Little things paid off. I found out as a campaigner that a young lady, not young, but she was special, had foot problems. And she needed special shoes. And I told Carl, I said, nobody will take her. I'm going to give her a call. So I gave her a call, took her in. We got special shoes made for her and so forth. And it was in Elmira. And I went out the next week, and everybody I saw said, boy, that was wonderful what you did for Mabel. And that's the kind of thing that catches voters who basically, when they look at a voter's pamphlet, it doesn't mean anything to them. And so what I tried to do once I got into leadership, and leadership in my case was minority leader in my 3rd term, it was to try and get people to emulate what I did in my campaign, and that as an organization that we pick candidates that will do the first-class job for the people and be constituent candidates. It worked. It took us a while, but it worked. And Gary Wilhelm, who was my minority leader when I was a freshman, did a good job of telling me what I had to do, because my job, both as a minority leader, wasn't so much inside the legislature, although it's a management position, so that everybody knows what's going on and that you're well represented. But what it was, the minority leader's job was outside of the legislature, making sure that we got the kind of candidates and kind of campaigns that we needed to take control.
So talk to me a little bit about your recollections of being a freshman representative. You win the election, and now it's January 79, and you go to Salem. Do you have any memories of that first term?
It's kind of interesting because it's a learning position. And I politically, I wasn't an active politician. I was a businessman. And basically, to be perfectly frank, I followed the leadership of Wilhelm's. And if I had a problem or a question or something, I was able to go to the minority leader and get my answer. He was a real leader. By the way, our minority leader of the 2nd term that I was there, because Gary had been promoted in the telephone company and had left the legislature, was Paul Hanneman. Paul Hanneman was an excellent legislator. He had good legislation, he was effective, but he had a district that he didn't really have to work. And consequently, if you're going to lead a group of people that have to have my kind of district and be successful, they needed someone who was far more aggressive than Paul was. And Paul stepped aside, and that's when I got the job of being minority leader, which I held then for 4 sessions. I had the management job inside the legislative sessions, and I had the campaign job outside the legislative sessions.
And so you had said that being minority leader is much more about what happens outside.
No, I would say in a way it's kind of equal because as a minority leader, the difference between you and the speaker, if you look at the numbers, has never been more than 2 or 3 votes. So you have to identify what's going to be important for the people that you represent. And you need to support every legislator in your caucus because they have different needs depending on where they are. And so one of the things that we do is we make sure that we understand the legislation. For example, there was a bill put in, going to be held late at night. It was called, let's see, what did they call that? It didn't mean anything. Well, we had a legislator, Liz Van Leeuwen, who read every bill. And she says, Larry, this is a big tax bill. So at that point in time, that's when I look at it and say, we've got to stop this. If Liz Van Leeuwen hadn't read that bill, we would never have identified it. And so one of the things we needed to do is we needed to know what was in front of us and what it would do. And then my favorite saying was, you don't vote no just because it's their bill. You vote no when you think you can make a difference in a bad bill or stop a bad bill. And we effectively did a lot of that.
So 4 terms as minority leader. And did your leadership change over those terms? Your leadership style or?
Well, my leadership style has sometimes been criticized because I expected loyalty. I expected that we work together and that if we're not going to support something, that everybody understands it in advance so that we don't get a bunch of people trapped on a bad bill. I had the advantage of recommending my people for committees. I didn't have the advantage as a minority leader to select the committees for my members, but generally speaking, Vera Katz, Guyton Cairns were pretty responsive. And my placement of people in committees was basically like this. My strongest people I put in the most important committees. And I made darn sure that when we had control, that we responded to the people who came in to testify on their meetings. I'll give you an example. I was a surprise because I had some committee chairs that would start their meetings late. And the public is sitting there for a half an hour. Legislators are sitting there for a half an hour. And that really disturbed me. So guess what? The next time one of those committee meetings was late, it was started by the Speaker of the House. It only happened twice, and committee chairs started getting there on time. So that's another responsibility for the minority leader, to make sure that his or her people are well attuned to what's going on and that everybody works along the same lines. Does everybody agree with? No. Does everybody want to vote yes on a particular bill that one of our caucus members has? No. But sometimes you bite the bullet because the next time a bill comes up, it may be yours. And you need that support.
When you're a representative, we have a citizen legislature in Oregon. Do you have such a thing when you're in session as a regular schedule? You're balancing working for the telephone company, having a family, and being a state representative?
This is where my, biggest problem was. As I grew in stature in the legislature, the job that I had with the telephone company, it was a very difficult job. And they finally came to me and said, we think you better skip the legislature. And this was 86. To see how close we were to being a speaker. And I said, by then I was a division manager. And I said, I'll take a demotion and take one of my district jobs reporting to me because it would have less responsibility than my division job. And they let me do that for that session. Next session, the pressure was back. And at that point in time, I basically decided, had 33 years in, and talked to Carlin. And we decided that it was time for me to retire. I did not want to give up the legislature because I could see where we had things going the right way. And I got a call right after I announced that I was leaving the telephone company from a gentleman who had been supportive over the years. His name was Harry Merlo, the president of Louisiana Pacific. He said, "Larry, I understand you're quitting your telephone company job. What are you going to do?" I said, "I need a part-time job. Still have 4 boys in college and 3 boys in college, and 1 in Lane Community College." And he said, "Well, come in and see me." So I went in, and he offered me a job, a sales job, in Louisiana Pacific office in Portland, which would allow me to continue my legislative. He was very supportive. Continue my legislative experience. 27 days later, I was promoted to department head. Louisiana Pacific had 1 vice president and 9 department heads, and Harry, the chief executive. I became one of those 9 department heads, and I served through my first session as Speaker of the House with Louisiana Pacific. At the end of that session, I went to Harry and I said, "Harry, I'm not doing you any good, and I'm not doing the legislature what it should be. I'm doing my family not any good. I'm going to have to leave." And he said, "Bless you. I appreciate what you've done." I said, "I appreciate what you've done to give me the opportunity," because that's the way with him was the way that I was successful in becoming Speaker of the House.
So let's talk about this becoming Speaker of the House, because you had these successful campaigns, and then the Republicans have control of the House for the first time in 19 years, 16 years?
I think you said 17. I think we beat him on the other side, didn't we? 18.
Okay.
I'll go with you. My memory isn't quite that good. It's been several years.
So we have 19 years. First
19
majority
years.
in 19 years.
Yep.
And then held on to that majority after that. So this is November 1990. So how did you get from House Minority Leader to becoming Speaker of the House? What were some of that took years, right? I mean, you had to.
I'll be real honest. My job didn't change.
Okay.
I had basically been doing the job that a speaker would do, but I was doing it with less votes. So in essence, my first assignment was to make sure that we were operating in a means where we could accomplish what was best for the people of the state of Oregon. People think, oh, she's saying that. But the fact of the matter is that was one of our objectives. And we didn't feel that we were on the hearing end. They were always on the speaking end as accomplishing things. And so one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that I couldn't be criticized for the way I appointed people to committees. And I called every single Democrat in and sat down with them and asked them what committees they'd like to be assigned to. I think I probably didn't assign 3 of the total to the first one that they wanted. And there was a reason that it didn't work out well. But my objective was really to give them the best shot that they could. Because down the road a piece, we're going to work with them. That was my objective. We wanted to get rid of all this one-sided stuff that we had been faced for years. And John Kitzhaber made it easier. John Kitzhaber was president of the Senate first time I was Speaker of the House. And he and I worked very close together. I think I showed you a letter I got from him, which really pleased me. And when I left the legislature, he gave me a white Stetson hat. Could have been black, but it was a white Stetson hat. And he was a delight to work with. And he learned something. You saw in my library, I have 122 volumes I put together in that library. And I learned that from John Kitzhaber. If you ever met with him, sat down, he had a book in his hand, and he kept notes, copious notes, of everything that you talked about. And sometime if you have a chance to talk to him, ask him about that, because he has an excellent memory. He wants to work together, which was unique in my experience to the legislature at that point in time. And I had the responsibility of picking the best people for the committees. And there are some people, I'll give you an example. A member of the caucus who I think he probably didn't think I respected him. He was one of the more liberal members of the caucus. What he didn't know was I watched everything he did and learned from it. His name is Tony Van Fleet, and he was a Ways and Means guy. And I learned my Ways and Means situation from a guy who wasn't a Republican like I'm a Republican. But it just showed you that we could work together again and accomplish a lot.
Did the work you had done with Mark Hatfield and your friendship with him, did that influence you at all once you became an elected official? Because he seemed like someone who was working.
I'll tell you the
with
interesting story about that. Like I said, Mark did not encourage me to get involved in politics. But when I announced, I got a call from him. And he said, "Is there anything we can do for you?" And I said, I'm using the Packwood Bible. And Packwood Bible was what? Raise money, go door to door. Yeah. And he said, well, I'm going to have my chief of staff come out and sit down with you and see if there's something we can work on. The chief of staff was the dollar a year man. You know who that is?
No.
Jerry Frank.
Okay.
And he flew out from Washington, sat down with me. And the truth of the matter is, they were encouraging because they said, we think you're doing it the right way. But that's a friendship, like I say, that although he didn't encourage me, I had so much activity with him in his campaigns that I built an understanding that I couldn't have gotten any other way.
I want to go back real quickly, just in looking at my questions. When you were minority leader, previous to us sitting down in person, you were generous enough to send me some clippings and some materials about your life and your career. And there was a 1993 Willamette Week article in which Peter Courtney said that you wrote the book on being the minority leader. And I just wondered if you could elaborate on that.
You know, I think if you take a look back at what we've talked about, you'll see elaboration, because what Peter did is he found the same idea. And by the way, he's a kick and a half. And he and I, he'd always say, oh, the Campbells again. I just can't do anything with it. And Craig could really do a good job with him. I mean, but the fact of the matter is, he recovered some of the things that they weren't doing on the Democratic side because they'd been in control so long. We beat them at the ballot because we were making all these contacts and so forth. And so when he says that I made the system, well, I did, because again, what are the two things?
You got to go door to door and you got to raise money.
Hey, you know, you make a good candidate.
Oh, you're right. I would put my foot in my mouth too much, I think. Yeah, I mean, you have to, and that's how you were able to win back, the party was able to win majority for the first time in 19 years, right? You were out among the constituents, you were going door to door, you were raising money.
First of all, we were targeting weakness.
Okay.
That was one thing. In other words, there were some candidates that could be targeted because they weren't doing their job with their constituency. And that was a big part of it. And we had new legislators coming in that were willing to do the work. And it was close. I mean, we almost had it the previous year, there was a count that didn't come in from Klamath Falls until well late. We would have tied.
In 88?
Yeah, in 88. And, but that was as close as we had come. The 87 election, which was 88, the Democrats won that 31-29. And the Klamath Falls seat wasn't determined until late, and it was by very few votes. And trying to remember the legislature, it doesn't make any difference, but that kept us from taking it the year before we did.
But it must sort of fuel your fire in a little bit when you get so close to just want to keep pushing.
Well, I think you haven't known me very long, but I think you can recognize there is a little fire there.
Yeah.
And I had an objective right from day one, and I was able to accomplish it. But the important part then was to make sure that when I decided to leave the process, that someone else would pick up that objective and continue to get our people good candidates, door to door, raise money, win elections. And we did for 17 years before the Democrats got in again.
So if you take me to November 1990, the election results come in, you have the majority in the House. How is the decision made that you will become the speaker? Is that amongst the caucus?
The caucus made the determination. The minute the election results were official, I got a call from Hawaii. Cedric Hayden says, "Hey, boss, you're our new speaker. I'm with you. Just give me a good assignment." And hung up. It was pretty well known that it had been very helpful to follow the guidelines that I'd established. And there wasn't anybody that was willing to take me on.
And then going into the new legislative session, what is your workload looking like?
Heavy. As you probably recognize, I call it a three-tiered lobby. There are three kinds of lobbyists. There are individuals who have something of real concern to them that are willing to come and face a legislative body, talk in front of a committee, and make a presentation. That's what I used to call the right kind of lobby, because those people are very serious. They know their subject. And lobbying really is a process of teaching or sharing information. And a good lobbyist will always be able to tell a legislator, for example, when they're lobbying them, the pluses and minuses of their bill. If they can't do that, they shouldn't be lobbying. Another thing that you'd find is that the second kind of lobbyist that I would identify is the paid lobbyist. They've got one of the toughest jobs in the world because they have to be very knowledgeable of all of the things that they're involved in. Legislators basically have got 3,000 bills to deal with. Most of them are not Liz Van Leeuwen's. They don't sit down at night and read bill after bill after bill. So they have to get their information from someplace. Now they can get it from the third lobby group. The third lobby group are legislators, but I never found very many of them that I could depend on every bill. The lobbyist that gets paid for the bill, they basically have to be able to transfer their knowledge to legislators in a way that make the legislators want to support them. And so there you got the three lobby groups. And as you know, later, we became one of those lobby groups for the Victory PAC. Or not Victory PAC, but the Victory Group.
So you were working with these different types of lobbyists going into the new legislative session and then throughout.
Actually, that's an interesting question, because as I look back at it, I wasn't working with the lobbyists when we went into session. I was working with legislators, number one, to make sure we had the greatest strength. Number two, that we had a chance to work with some Democrats who were more conservative and from time to time were willing to vote the same way we would. And in turn, we were willing to vote the things that they wanted, which we might not otherwise do. So setting the process up, that's when you talk about the 1,900 employees I had to the telephone company of a management responsibility. I watched the preceding speakers. I was right with them all the time. I watched and I evaluated what's worked for them and what didn't work for them. And so I had all those notes of things that, boy, if I take control sometime with my caucus, these are the things we're going to do, or these are the things we aren't going to do. And then I had to pick my leadership. And one of my favorites, and of course he turned to be outstanding, was Greg Walden. Greg went from leadership in our caucus to Congress and spent, as you know, many years in Congress. But that was the kind of brightness. We had some real young, aggressive legislators that were willing to work with us on that. And so we did. We basically turned it into our process.
Did you talk to any Republicans who had been Speaker of the House, which would have been before your time in the legislature?
It's interesting you ask that question because in college I was a member of Delta Tau Rho. There's a goblet over there, a silver goblet, and if you pinned your lady and married her, you got it on the side, and if you chug-a-lugged it in a certain amount of time, you got your name on top. I was one of the top guys, but interestingly enough, that fraternity lasted 10 years, 157 of us. It's the only 157 member fraternity in history that ever had two Speakers of the House. Phil Lang was the other one. He wasn't a Republican, he was a Democrat, but Phil was very helpful.
So you're deciding who is going to be on the committees.
Yep.
You're working with your caucus, and you're also needing to work across the aisle with members of the other party. And talk to me about, maybe this is a good time to talk about some legislative successes. I know there's a piece of legislation that's very important to you.
Yeah. It's interesting because I had several areas that I was interested in, but almost all the way through the process, I was dependent on others with introduction of legislation because my hands were full. And if you introduce legislation, you got to be prepared to be a lobbyist. And so consequently, I limited the areas that I personally was involved in. I also supported a lot of bills that I didn't sign on to. In fact, my recommendation to legislators is you really want to be serious about a bill before you sign your name to it, because you don't know what it's going to look like when they get through with it. One of my areas that I was most interested in protecting was law enforcement. And one of my successes, I can tell you about some of my losses, but one of my successes was funding 11 motorcycle units. First motorcycle units we had in our state police cadre, and I got to fly in the Bear in the Air. And it was interesting because the Bear in the Air was able to measure the speed of traffic on I-5. And the motorcycle units and also all the other trooper units would stop the speeders, and they would point up and say, "That's who got you." And it was amazing. You could see those cars coming that were doing 85 and 90 miles an hour because of the way they were spinning in and out. He didn't have to measure them, but he did, and they got tickets. We saved a lot of lives with that organization. And the last, now a very good friend of mine is Timothy McLean. And Timothy was the state superintendent of state police. And he took me out to the last motorcycle operator so that she could have her picture taken with me. And she had basically been a motorcycle operator for 10 years. And she's a tiny little thing. And I was so proud of her. But I actually, interesting enough, I had tears in my eyes when I saw what those units had accomplished. They're gone today, but at that time it was important. The most important piece of legislation from my standpoint, and I provide some information for you on it, but it's called the Children's Care Team. And in 2003, we developed a group, so let's see, what I'll call it a committee.
Not 2003.
93.
93.
93.
Right. And this was during your second term as speaker.
Right.
Okay.
We developed a organization made up of 31 individuals, 6 senators, 6 6 Democrats. In other words, 6 Senate members, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats.
Okay.
House the same. 6 people from the children's operations around the state. 6 business people. In other words, a very broad range. That group spent an entire year looking at the children's programs that we had in the state, how they were being run, how they were being funded, what our lack of success was, and our lack of success was very, very high. I had that 6th group, by the way, was knowledgeable volunteers. We reviewed 242 programs for children and 32 state agencies. And the whole idea was to move our children's programs to wellness, to find the identity of the things that were going wrong with our young people, the problems that were being created by families that didn't have a basis and therefore couldn't take care of their children. And then by taking all of those departments and finding out, interestingly enough, many of them were doing duplicate activities, spending the same amount of money on the same thing and not accomplishing anything. And so consequently, this group, basically, I used to say that they were full-time employees. And they came forward with the package that I shared with you. Now, that package basically indicates all of the things that we found wrong with our children's programs. We found the things that we could eliminate, that we could combine, that we could improve. And of course, this bill was going to pass the House. That's the Speaker's bill. But I thought, wow, what's going to happen in the Senate? And lo and behold, it immediately passed out of committee the first day they had it. And I wonder, why in the world did we get such quick action? Well, interestingly enough, Joyce Cohen, who was the chairman of that committee, was one of the senators. And I looked at 4 other members of that committee, and 3 of them were total Republicans and Democrats on the bill. Now, what I'd like to do today is I'd like to take this same bill and go back and find out how many things have been destroyed in what we attempted to accomplish. And if there was any reason why a 92-year-old would want to run for the legislature, you now know it is. But basically, we really were successful. And it made my day because of all of the legislation that I sponsored, this was the most important piece.
So was the idea to be more proactive rather than reactive with some programs that were in place for children? Or?
That's a great question because one of the things that we looked at was Hawaii's program. And what we did, with looking at all of our own internal things, we looked at every program we could get our hands on in other states. So in essence, we could try to pick the best. It was like picking the low-hanging fruit, but pick the best things that we could that we could find and incorporate them into what we're doing, or try to improve things based on what somebody else is doing. And in the case of Hawaii, they had a great program. And their program was basically Healthy Start in Hawaii. And you probably have heard about Healthy Start because it's been successful across the country. And we basically took the Hawaii plan and put it into effect. And the results that we got was amazing. And that I brought this along just in case you wanted to ask questions about it. But that's another positive that came out of this, the children's design program. Another one, Churchill High School had a program for teen mothers that had gone through difficult times, had been beaten and mishandled and so forth, and started a program of strength for them and their babies. And it was interesting the number of cases that we had that before where the individual was injured or problem with difficulty for them, and what happened after they went through this program and how strong they were and how helpful it was. So if I did anything really positive in the legislative process, it was basically to support what's most important to me, and that's my family and everyone else's family.
So you were first elected in 1978, and you ended up serving 4 terms as minority leader, 2 as Speaker of the House, and then I believe in 95 you decided not to seek re-election?
Well, it was kind of interesting because you probably remember Ballot Measure 5. Ballot Measure 5 was our greatest challenge as a legislature. It was a restructuring of how we used our tax dollars. And that was probably one of the toughest jobs that I had while I was in the legislature. And I think we were effective in getting through it without the state being destroyed, although everybody thought that that would be difficult. And I had a program that I presented, and I'm trying to remember the one of my favorite editors, because I had a lot of dissenters outside the legislature, and they said that basically what I was doing was I was just preparing to run for governor. And when I saw that, it kind of tickled me because Carlin and I had already decided that I was going to leave the legislature. And we had decided on that Thanksgiving that we were going to start our own business. And I made the mistake in a hearing, not a hearing, but we had a meeting with some of the newspaper people. And they said, well, are you going to run for governor? And I said, not only am I not going to run for governor, but I'm not going to run for the legislature again. And that was my announcement that I was ready to leave. And I'd accomplished what I wanted to do. If you take a look, I don't deserve the credit for all those years afterwards, but they used my money, they used my programs. So I have a feeling of some success in keeping the Republicans in control of the House for the next 17 years.
Yeah, I think it was 17 from 1990.
Well, it was...
So 2007? Until 2007?
2007, at the end of the 2005 session.
And so then you had started the Victory Group, which you mentioned, and
well, we started the
family was
district
involved.
group the year that I left the legislature.
Okay.
And our first legislative businesses were Louisiana Pacific, surprisingly enough.
Full circle.
was one of them. Law enforcement, the chiefs of police, who are still represented by us. Now our company, I say our company, I have nothing to do with it anymore. I think I sold it out for a very reasonable price. But Kevin represents all law enforcement now. And although the state police don't have an external lobbyist, he does pro bono work for them. He still represents the loggers, AAA. He's now representing the Oregon Hospital Association. He's got a whole whole list of great clients. So our business was very successful.
What was it like working now in a legislative business versus having been a legislator?
No different. Remember, lobbyists, from my standpoint, it can be a legislator, it can be an individual, or it can be a paid company. We were a paid company, but we lobbied basically just like successful legislators lobby. We got a broader field because we lobby both sides.
And did you stay involved in campaigns for legislators that were coming up behind you?
Is the Pope Catholic? Yeah, I have been involved with a number of races over the years. I finally closed out Victory PAC several years ago now. I was getting too old to knock on doors. But interestingly enough, Greg Walden has just stepped up, and I think he got a $2 million contribution from Phil Knight for legislative races, and that's my kind of business. I would like to mention, though, something that's close and dear to my heart. Remember Black Rowley, who lived to be 37 years old? One of the things that I got was a call from Dave Nelson, who said, "Are you ready?" And what he was talking about is they had offered me 16 years earlier to purchase part of a horse and get into the horse racing business. I talked to the boys, and they said, "You can have a division, a horse racing division." And that became the center of my attention instead of all this other stuff. And our first horse, In Search of Fame, on my wall over there is a portrait. Interesting, because we were taking Search of Fame to Boise to race, and our jockey was with us in a truck, and we were talking to Carlin, who was here at home, and he said, "Mrs. Campbell, did he ever have a portrait of you made?" We fired that jockey. That was his last race. But our horse ran first 38 times. And we were warned that if you lose money, the government considers it a hobby, and you'll be taxed for all your incomes. And we were in the black 9 out of 13 years. Over there on my shelf is a binder for each year that In Search of Fame ran. After we're through with this, I'd like to show you one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can see that there are these common threads from your younger years that, the
Everything
love
is
of
run
horses.
through.
Absolutely.
It's just like my wife, a blind date, Rose Festival, and Rose Festival was the center of my activity for 5 years.
Yeah, because you were president.
I was
correct?
president, yeah.
Yeah, and it just seemed like you were building foundation after foundation to prepare you for the leadership roles you have.
I've been very lucky.
I'm
very
sure it's much
lucky.
more than luck, but
No.
those
And
are
I've
the
got
questions I had for
I've
you.
got a great family.
Uh-huh.
The boys are doing very well. And I just got a new granddaughter.
Yeah, how many grandchildren do you have now?
We have 6, but we have 2 great grandchildren, a boy and a girl. And we just got a new grandson. He married our granddaughter, and we accepted him immediately. And that's going to be an interesting family. And my granddaughter's gone to work with Kevin in the Victory group.
So now you have 3 generations that have...
We have 3 generations. In fact, when Carlin and I were up visiting the Capitol a month or so ago, I think it initiated this gathering because I was asked, "Have you folks talked to me?" And I said no. And first person we walked into in the Capitol was John Kitzhaber. And then Kevin and my granddaughter basically saw Carlin and I out, and there was a picture. I think I've got it here. The three Campbell generation.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and she's going to be good. She's going to be good.
These are the questions I had for you. Is there anything else you want to make sure we covered?
I think you've done a good job.
I appreciate it.
I haven't talked this much in several years.